Hello and welcome to the Radical Word Podcast. I'm Jose Leal with my partner, Matt Perez, who's just back from his trip to Mexico, hopefully feeling okay and
Yep.
ready for a conversation. And today we've got Heather Wickman from Colorado. Heather comes to us as a referral from Gary, who we interviewed, I think, about 2-3 months ago. Gary's a great connector and a great supporter of people who are doing good work. And so when he recommended we talk to Heather, I thought, absolutely, if Gary thinks that Heather's worth talking to, then we think Heather is worth talking to. And which is unusual because we tend to avoid coaches because all too often coaches are about, I've got the solution to everything.
Mm.
But it sounds like you recognize that we don't have all the solutions and that it's a collaborative effort to come and fix some of the stuff that we know at work. Well,
Absolutely.
thank you for joining us. I'd like to ask you to start with what made you untethered?
Such a good question. Thank you, Jose and Matt, for having me. It's a delight to be here, and a shout out to Gary if he's around. Thank you for the connection. What made me untethered? That's like such the perfect question right here. So, just really high level, I would say, I kind of started off with the American dream. So I joined corporate America when I was young. Um, and had this idea in mind of what success would look like. And I worked really diligently, very methodically on that career path of, climb the corporate ladder, get to a certain, job title, get to a certain income level, get to a certain, these are the amount of team members that I have. And kind of moved through that pretty quickly. I think by the time I was 32, I was like, ta-da, like I got to exactly where I wanted to be. And then shortly thereafter, I had this kind of massive crash of, okay, I got here and it feels terrible. It feels like nothing that I thought it would or what I actually wanted. And so I had one of those like those Brene Brown moments, those crisis, those spiritual awakenings that says basically I have to do something different. I had gotten kind of the job that I wanted. I had the kind of the financial capacity that I was really proud, excited about. And then I was like calling my husband up one day and saying, babe, I have to quit. And, him being pretty shocked and like, we just moved. What are you talking about? Which that was about 10 years ago now. And ever since have been on a pretty radical journey of self-discovery, self-exploration around what does it mean to be a leader in this world and what does it mean for me to live a life that I really love to live. And absolutely, I do not have all the answers. Like I said, as we were just kind of connecting, I feel like I know less every single day. And I know that probably is a terrible thing to say as a coach, but it's actually kind of true. The more that I know and the more that I experience, it feels like the less I actually know. And so every day becomes this beautiful experiment of who am I? How am I showing up in the world? And what is the impact that I want to leave? And so that's a little bit about me. I have Untethered, and I work with leaders who are on a journey of trying to figure out this thing called life and work and world, and happen to work also with horses to aid in that process. So I'll kind of leave it right there and let you
That's
take
especially with the picture of the horses behind you. It's a perfect.
it. Exactly.
Um, I find the horses interesting, and I'll ask about that in a
Yeah.
little bit because that I find kind of cool, and I find that people who use nature, which of
Mhm.
course horses are,
Yeah.
um, uh, really get to settle down a little bit.
Mm.
They're not thinking and talking about the environment that they're in
Yeah.
in these corporate settings. Um, I myself kind of had a similar experience with you as you in that I was flying back from laying off another group of people because I went through 6 rounds of it was a .com thing,
Yeah.
and after 6 rounds, going back to Toronto, where I was based, and just realized like I can't do this anymore,
Mhm.
you know. And that process of coming to that realization of, for months, for years,
Mhm.
this feeling of this isn't right, and yet just saying, well, it's my fault. Like, I'm not good enough, I'm not capable enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm not all these things.
Yeah.
And I wonder if I had come to someone like you and said, this is what's happening to me. This is what I'm going through. This is what I've been feeling for the last 3, 4, 5 years. And yet I don't know. Do I continue in this path,
Mhm.
or do I step aside and do something different? Because part of my, when I said about coaches, part of my concern is that we kind of make it okay to suffer
Mm.
in some cases, right? We make it like you can do it. You'll be strong, and we'll build you right back up. Go back into. And I had that with people at work in my organization where they'd have a burnout, and then they'd get some coaching, some therapy, some so forth, and then they'd come back and it's like, I'm ready, and then they'd burn out 2 years later.
Yeah, exactly. It never works.
It
Yeah.
never works. And so, what would you say? What would you have said to me? Not,
Yeah.
in your practice, what's your sense of what is happening in corporate life and work life that is burning so many people up, and then we just sort of bandage them up, throw them back in?
Yeah. Yeah. Man, there is so much there. The first thing that comes to mind is, whenever someone comes to me with that kind of question, and it's frequent, right? In a potential transition out of a career into a different career, there's always the space of a pause that I try to create for someone to stop and kind of become really present in the process of a conversation or the work with the horses. Because what I do know is, if you allow enough time, the wisdom of the truth within will reveal itself.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing that I know that can tell you the right thing for you to do. And so, we would probably have a pretty lovely and deep conversation about like what really matters, and some conversations about like life is short, burnout is real, like in conversations about self-worth and where do you want to be, and how do you want to be a person, potentially a father, a son, a mother, a daughter, some of those different questions to help us maybe ground in a little different place that is not the I'm going to struggle, I'm going to force, I'm going to make it through, because I tried that too. And
Yeah,
you come full circle and you're like, I'm here again.
right.
So, yeah.
Well, and I love that answer because the answer is within us, right?
Absolutely.
Right? There isn't anyone who's going to tell us what the answer is.
Hmm.
Uh, but what Matt and I, we've been at this for a few years, and we've sort of come to this realization that what breaks us is the misfit between human beings and a system we call a system of fiat, a system of imposition, a system of control that we as human beings evolved to collaborate with one another.
Hmm.
Yes, we like to compete with one another as well. But what gives us joy is the ability to actually create together, to produce together, to make an impact in the world. And we've moved away from those kinds of feedback from our work
Hmm.
to, the 360 review, bunch
Yeah.
of check marks on, 5 sheets of paper. And then we're like, oh, look, I got a smiley face at the end here.
Hmm.
And I'm supposed to be happy.
Yeah.
And every time I did those, I actually felt worse, both when I did it with the people that I managed and when the CEO did it with me,
Mhm.
because I didn't feel right. It was a game we were playing.
Mhm.
And so how do we sense both the human impact of our system of work, that is one of, I said, command and control, and this desire to really do things? I mean, the desire to work is there,
Mhm.
right? People want to help, people want to
Yeah.
create, they want to do, and yet the way we have to do it seems like a total mismatch.
Yeah. So I want to take this in two parts. And so the first, when you talked about the mismatch kind of within ourselves and within the systems that we try to do this work, I would say there's oftentimes a mismatch in the belief of who we are at work and the belief of actually who we can be or who we want to be. And man, I speak to this really firsthand in the recency of like the now for me in terms of really reevaluating, man, the beliefs that I hold potentially not fully consciously are impacting my life in a way that I absolutely do not want it to. And the mismatch happens inside first. And some of the work that we do is really getting clear on like what are the beliefs and the things that I want to hold within me that allow me to be as authentic and as impactful as possible, and then let go of the limiting beliefs that are potentially holding us back. And oftentimes at work, they show up as masks, like these masks that we have to take off and be like, well, today I have to be, an authoritarian because we need to get done. So I would say, first off, I would say we really have to be careful about the mismatch within. Are the beliefs that I hold actually the beliefs that I want to hold and are most helpful for me to being the best that I can be? And then, kind of the larger question about how do we do this thing? This I love to work too. Like I actually love to do this type of work. And I love business. I think businesses are a powerful force of good. And when we're in systems that are really a mismatch, either for our core values or for just the ways in which we work, then I think we have to really evaluate how kind of what am I willing to do? Can I create different systems within the sphere that I operate? And oftentimes there are things that we can do. Can I influence the systems that are kind of larger at work? Potentially. That's definitely harder. Or the choice of do I need to find a different system to work within? And some of those organizations exist. And then sometimes you have to create them yourselves, like you guys are doing right now, right? How do you create different systems where people can thrive differently? So, um, a whole roundabout way of answering that question, but I think it is a complex one.
It is, the interesting thing for me is that I think you said inside, internally, and the external match, fit. I think there's a middle one as well, which is the fit with the people
Yeah,
that we're within, right?
yeah,
And all too often, our organizations are created based on roles, not on personalities, not on humans.
hmm,
And so we're like, well, you have to work with these people.
yeah,
You're senior management and you've got, a dozen people you work with, many of which you don't like,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And many of which don't like you. And many of which you don't trust.
yeah,
And you're working in an environment that's unsafe, right? And and so I think that the structure of the organization and as you said, the values ethos of the organization, along with the fact that in order to get to certain places in the hierarchy, you have to have a certain type of personality, right? You have to be aggressive. You have to strive. You have to sort of have a type A,
hmm,
and those people are not what we want to be around necessarily, right?
hmm,
Even though we might be one of them. We often find ourselves sort of butting heads with people because we are both seeking to do the same thing or to get to the same place. And I think that when we start to see that there is a whole bunch of mismatch, both internally to us, in our group of people we work with, in the organization as a whole, in society and the way that work is structured, as a thing that we must do rather than a thing that we want to do. Right. We don't create work as an aspiration. We create work as a necessity.
Absolutely.
And as a necessity, we end up hating work. A lot of people do. I was watching, I don't know if you know Daniel Schmachtenberger. Daniel Schmachtenberger speaks very well about the crisis that we're in the middle of. And I believe he calls it the meta crisis or polycrisis or one of those crises.
Sure.
And what he describes is that we have this mode of operation as workers, as humans, as citizens, that is not driven by our desire to do good for nature, for ourselves, for each other, but a desire to make money or a desire to be famous. And that those desires are not innate to us in the level that they become when we go through our societal training. Right? I mean, the child walks into kindergarten and the first thing the teacher shows is, here's the little stars if you're good. And here's all the good kids and here's all the bad kids. And more stars and more stars and more stars and more stars. And we forget that that's essentially what's happening to us when we get into the executive realms.
Yeah.
They're just giving us more stars. You're the one that has the biggest team, the biggest department, the biggest responsibility, the biggest budget. And we fight for those things because those are the stars.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I agree. I mean,
that's not unfortunate. I think it's just the reality of our situation.
But I do think there is. So I've had the opportunity to experience what you were describing, and I've had the opportunity to experience something different, which is an executive environment. And I will say more so looking from the outside in, but having a pretty intimate external view, that when there is a leadership team in place, that does come from not the command and control. We're here to make money. We're here based on those desires, but we're here to actually support each other, make an impact in the work that we're doing, and provide well for our teammates and our community and all these kind of things. The dynamic can be different. And so I know there's a massive systems problem here, but I also know there's a massive leadership problem here in terms of how do we rewrite this narrative around it's about making money. Like, money is an output of doing really good work in the world. And I know a lot of people are out there like, I have to make a living, so I'm going to work for money. But when we begin to, again, shift that belief to where do I want to make the biggest impact and how do I surround myself with the best people to do that, I think a different environment can be created.
I absolutely agree with that. And I think that's what...
What's an example of that?
Like in terms of interactions or in terms of what
when
kind of
people are working for the community and to provide, what you said, that there's a command and control crowd.
Yeah.
And there's the people that don't do it for that purpose. I never met them, so that's what I'm asking for an example.
Yeah. So while staying relatively anonymous, I would say that the focus is not so much on like the money that we're going to make, but the focus continually comes back to this idea of like, what are we here to do? Who are we here to serve? And kind of the common threads that I hear in those conversations are around like, how do I help you grow? And I'm a huge David White fan. In terms of work becomes kind of a pilgrimage of our identity. If we're in the right environment, with the right support around us, we can really act as catalyzers of really understanding who we are. And that's kind of the example that I want to be able to share, Matt, is that I've seen this happen where conversations in the executive team are not necessarily just around profit and loss and the next board meeting and the next whatever it is, but it's about where are we putting our effort? Is that aligned to our purpose and our values? And are we leaning in and holding each other accountable and growing as individuals? And so I've seen those conversations happen. And then I see the retention that happens in those executive teams. And I see, like flocks of people follow those leaders. They're these little, they're like safe places.
Islands of oasis.
There we go. Thank you. And man, those are the things that I want to create in the world.
And Matt and I would argue that and we've seen that in some of the self-managed organizations that we've observed and tracked over the years. But unfortunately, it's bound to that leader or those leaders.
Agreed.
And the second they resign, quit, get bought out, retire, poof, the magic is gone and the organization starts to collapse because the default is not that.
That is true.
Right.
Absolutely.
And even when those leaders remain in place, let me not be anonymous. I worked for Sun Microsystems, great company. And every year, Scott Maniga would say, I never managed a $10 million company. And then next year we had a $100 million company. So it was very successful. And as we were getting there, we experienced a lot of what you said about growing and things like that. But there was a moment when that stopped. The same leader, the same everything. And then we worried more about the dollars. And as we started building over servers and doing things what I consider the wrong way. And the growth and all that stuff went out the door. So that's what I was asking for, was an example. And when the companies are small, that's to be, I expect that people help each other and there's more work and people. And so as somebody starts growing in a certain direction, you encourage them because you don't want to do it. And stuff like that. But once it gets big and people want to come in, we had a lot of HP people want to come in. It goes away. That thing of growing and all that goes away. And it was more of we're doing things for the money. Not that somebody came down and said you have to make more money or whatever, but you have to cut your schedule or we're going to build this instead of that because this is going to make more money. That was the only thing that I remember. And then some got sold to
Oracle.
Oracle, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I forget things too because of medicine. So I don't know of any big companies that keep that up.
Yeah, I've experienced it in a big company, but your point is true that when the leader of that big company moves or has to leave or takes on a new position
or
things
succeeds.
Yeah.
or at some point becomes focused on the growth of the organization, the success, the survival of the organization,
Yeah.
and starts looking at the quarterlies
Right.
rather
Mhm.
than the people.
Yeah.
And you become a public company, and now you have to manage the market. You're no longer
Exactly.
as preoccupied with the people as you were. So I'd like to switch gears a little
Yeah.
bit, if you don't mind, Heather, because my sense is we need thousands of people like you
And you. And you both.
and us, because this transformation that needs to happen from a way of working that is unhealthy,
Mhm.
unproductive, damaging the earth, damaging our communities, damaging society at large, cannot continue. We're worried about the climate disaster that's impending. And I think before the climate disaster, we will have a social disaster.
Mm.
And the social disaster, as I perceive it, is that we're so unhappy and unengaged at work, with the way we work, that our lives don't have the same level of purpose, the same
Mhm.
intention of life. And we're bored. And so we go to social media and we get
Yeah.
captivated by all kinds of crazy stuff.
Mhm.
And we end up, and I think that the seed of all of that, because I think if we were happy, successful, impactful, had a meaning and belonging within our work environments, that we wouldn't have the same
Yeah.
issues that we have as a society.
Mhm.
So how do we fix work moving forward? And part of what I thought, say 5 years ago, was it's all about the human side. I've come to realize that it's not all about the human side, because the systems themselves don't allow us to be ourselves.
Mhm.
So I think we can go meditate, and we can be with horses, and we can be all these nice things that help us ground ourselves.
Mhm.
But then we get put in the middle of an environment that's toxic.
Yeah. Yeah. I so there's part of this situation that I don't have an answer to in terms of the way in which so many big for-profit organizations operate based on a quarterly profit schedule, right? Some of this is just something that feels completely out of my sphere, but maybe I'm behind you a bit in my thinking, but I still think it's a human issue. Not even a human issue, a human worthy challenge, because we have the work to do to have life be the way that we want to in terms of the meaning. And as leaders and organizations, we have the capacity to change the systems. And so I still feel like the agency is on the human side to create the change that we need. And so when I think about how do we start making a change, I don't have like a mass intervention that I have in my back pocket to allow this to happen. But I do know that when you begin to work with leaders that are honestly and genuinely wanting to make a change in the way in which they operate, in the way in which they lead the world, that can have massive effects throughout an organization.
Yes.
And so, in my heart, that is where the work lies for me, at least.
Well, and it does for us as well. I think the thing that we've come to realize is that even though there's been many experiments
Yeah.
in self-management and cooperatives and all kinds of different
Yeah.
experiments, what we haven't seen is bringing them together,
Hmm.
right? We have people like yourself working with leadership to help them ground themselves, be servers to their teams, not
Yeah.
authoritarian leaders and so forth. but then there's a structural problem that
Yeah.
causes them not to do it. Then there's an economic problem that causes them
Mhm.
not to do it.
Yeah.
There's all of these types of things, and we need to do them all to some
Agreed.
degree at once,
Mhm.
right? And part of the idea of a radical world is a world that changes not everything at once in the sense that everything becomes miraculously changed, but that we're pushing on all of these things cohesively, working together to cohesively push on these different changes. There are people who are working on legal changes of what an organization is. There
Yeah.
are people who are working on the structural of organizations from an accounting perspective.
Yeah.
People who are working on community currencies. I mean,
Mhm.
there's a lot of different work that's happening, but we can't see any of them working by themselves,
Independently, for sure.
independently.
Mhm.
And so I would look at something, the work that you do, and think it must be both fulfilling and disheartening to see that you can help a team or a leader, and that individual can move on and do better work in their lives, do better for themselves and for the people they work with. And at the same time, knowing there's a couple of billion more of those people that aren't being helped, that are suffering still, that are going through the same thing and don't step out long enough to seek the help, to gain the help that they need.
Yeah, it is, and I think I have some hope in terms of, the work that you're doing to connect all these different people doing all these kind of different works, the work that Gary's doing with radicality, like pulling in, experts in these different fields of how do we create systemic change that hits, structure, hits people, hits the heart, hits the mind, hits the money, all of these things. And so while, yeah, I know that I hold a tiny piece of the puzzle, I do believe that there are these communities that are being created that have the potential to, like you say, push on all of these different elements in a way that at some point it's got to move.
Right. Because I think it's sort of like having a chair with only one leg,
Yeah,
right? Like it doesn't work really well.
yeah, all by itself.
But once you have two or three, I mean, three or four, all of a sudden it becomes more stable.
Right.
And the more legs, the more stable.
Hmm.
And in reality, many of the efforts that we've been making, we as a community at large, to help work be better, help people at work be better, we've been doing it with one leg,
Yeah.
right? We've been pushing one thing
Hmm.
and bringing those legs together to form a stable platform, if you will,
Yeah.
is the question for us. How do we engage in that process? How do we bring it to a place of taking the untethered
Hmm.
and joining them in ways that it's easier to do the work on the personal level
Hmm.
because they're not having to ignore all the nightmare that's happening, all the imbalance that's elsewhere.
Right. They're in an environment that's supportive and it's generative. And I couldn't agree more. So sign me up to whatever chair making factory we need to create to allow this to happen. Because yeah, I've been, the holacracy movement, all of these different things have been, and I love like the B Corp movement that's happening in terms of how do we structure organizations different. But um I haven't seen what you're describing yet in terms of coming together in that way that we can support each other.
They're all just one leg,
Yeah, exactly.
right? And
Mhm.
some of them are not all that strong a leg,
Yeah, a little
right?
shaky. Mhm.
But we'll find out when we bring them together to see, is it that it's a weak leg that doesn't work, or is it something that can only works when we have those other legs to support it and make it functional and
Agreed.
viable.
Agreed.
Could you, we're kind of running out of time.
Yeah.
Um, could you tell us a little bit more about the horses and
Yeah.
the work you do
Yeah.
in bringing people together in a special way. It sounds.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to think so, at least. Um, so it's a little bit unconventional for sure in terms of getting a leader or a team or a group of leaders to come together and working with horses as a way to catalyze some growth. But here's the thing that I know: the higher up
You
in the
mean real horses, like
yeah,
with legs and okay.
yeah, the higher up the organization you go, the less feedback that you get, or the less real feedback that you get. So the opportunities for real self-awareness, I think, diminish the higher you go up in the organization. Horses have a really unique ability to mirror and magnify kind of our beliefs, whether they're conscious or not, our energy and our intent. So as prey animals, they are incredible beings that have to detect these really subtle nuances of tone, of body language, of body tenseness, of muscle tenseness, of heart rate, of all of these different things. And they mirror not only what you project, but who you are. And so more often than not, it's an incredible opportunity for a leader to gain vital self-awareness about how they're showing up in the world and how better to lead. It's not for the leader that wants to continue to wear their mask. I'll say that. It's for the leader that wants to kind of step up and say, I need to lead differently. I have a big responsibility for leading this organization or this team, and I want to be able to do it in a way that's um, as authentic and really based in kind of that idea of stewardship. And so, as my husband always says, you can't bullshit a horse. And so you get an opportunity to interact with a horse. And like, for example, a leader recently just came in and was like, I just want the horse to follow me. I'm like, okay, let's have the horse follow you. So they are working with one horse, no halter, no lead rope, and goes in with the intent of, I want the horse to follow me. What does the horse do? The horse does not follow, right? And through some really good questioning and debrief, we find out that the horse is oftentimes sensing this incongruency because there's this sense of assertiveness, sense of confidence, like, I'm going to get this horse to follow me. Inside, there's this crazy insecurity of, there's no way this horse is going to follow me, right? And so you give an opportunity for that leader to really adjust in real time, to get present, to get true with what they're actually trying to accomplish. And oftentimes when they can do that and recalibrate, the horse will join them. And so it's an incredible opportunity for a leader to experience a different part of who they are and how they want to move forward into the world that oftentimes can't happen in a human to human interaction.
So basically, you can't bullshit a horse, but executives can be full of horse shit.
They can be to themselves, right?
Exactly.
And then it just gets called out. And then you get to deal with it. So it's beautiful work. I mean, the horses also, help people feel into themselves in a much different way. And so I've seen some beautiful moments of people coming back to what it feels like to love themselves and to feel like they are worthy and capable of doing exactly the thing that they want to do in the world. So it's pretty incredible.
Sounds like beautiful work.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for doing it. Thank you for joining us today and for taking the time. I'm going to introduce next week's guest. The gentleman we're going to be meeting with is Joshua Spodek. Joshua is the author and host of The Sustainable Life. Sounds like the kind of thing that we are talking about here in Radical World. And the topic is systemic change begins with personal change. Sounds familiar, huh?
It does.
So looking forward to Joshua. I followed him for a little while, and I think we've got a lot to talk about. Well, thank you again, Heather, for this conversation. I hope you got a little bit of what I got from it, which is helpful, because I think the work of recognizing that we all want pretty much the same thing. It's just that we've been given a lot of horse shit about
Yeah.
what we're supposed to do, what we're supposed to be like, what we have to do.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you've been helping to dig some of that reality out,
Peeling back the layers.
peeling back the layers. And I love that you're doing it with the use of horses and a place in Colorado that draws people to
Nature.
taking some time off.
Exactly.
So,
It is all of that. Thank you both. It's been a joy.
no, thank you. I hope you don't have to dig out of the snow.
Yeah, exactly. Just flurries.
Just flurries. Well, until next time.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.